Hey everyone, how you doing? I'm a little emotional right now, but I still wanted to share this. I've been kind of streaming little tears here, but I'm sitting here making these trading cards like the last week. I've got almost 300 of them made, and I've been enjoying it, getting really immersed into it. I'm learning so many things that just Oklahoma had a lot of jazz cats. Who knew it? But there's also just been this tugging at my heart for several reasons, and I was making a card for Joe Wilder today, and I found this cool picture of him as an older guy, looking peaceful, but also looking just kind of exhausted. And it triggered a little bit of emotion in me, and it just kind of opened up those pathways of empathy and understanding. Just take something to kind of get you into that space. This exhausted old black man just looking weary from having put so much love into the world for all these years and still being brunted at every gate by the winds of hate. And it kind of has impacted the rest of my afternoon. This card I made. I'll put a picture of the Wilder up here in a minute when I edit this. But uh, I'm a geography guy. People who know me follow me. I'm a history guy, and I've been putting in all these cards, almost 300 of them, people's place of origin, where they grew up for the most part. Like high school years are kind of where I want to, not where you're born, but where you grew up, And generationally, you can see the Great Migration. You can see the oldest cats who were almost all born in the South back in 1900, 1880s, 1910. And this Great Migration gets underway in the 20th century, and the jobs move them north. Jim Crow, the South, they move north for opportunity, not for war, not for retribution, for revenge, but for opportunity in a place that's supposed to be better. And I can see in these cards this movement of the people, as they go to St. Louis and Detroit and Chicago and Pittsburgh and Newark, New York City, Brooklyn. And they brought this wonderful music with them. This music of peace, of love, and of joy. A music of celebration, a music of embrace. Not one of hate and resentment and revenge, but one of let's have a good time. And how did we greet these people when they came to our cities? We're talking the Ella Fitzgeralds. We're talking all these wonderful men and women of jazz. And the history books tell us they were greeted with white flight. We picked up, unpegged our tents, and moved out. We left our homes, our jobs, our memories, our wooden tree swing, our gardens, the fences that we built, all our lives that we put into our homes. We abandoned because these blacks moved in to our neighborhoods, not looking for war, but looking for opportunity. And white flight is something that should be one of the most shameful words that we speak. It's such an embarrassment. And we say it such a haphazardly, kind of nonchalant way. Oh, white flight. But think about what it's saying. They moved into our neighborhoods, so we got the fuck out. I'm just gut-wrenched by it. You think about all these beautiful men and women, and I've been looking at 300 of them. I've done a lot of white cats too, but all these beautiful black men and women, and then so many of their faces and their photographs as I've been looking for their pictures, remind me of friends and people I know from the DJ community, from the black community that's in Twin Cities. I recognize and see their expressions and their joy and how they interact. I see people I know in all their faces. And I know how they behave and how they feel. And to have operated in this brunting wind of hate and fear to the point where people left their lives behind. Not just by the dozens, not just by the hundreds, not just by the thousands, but to the tune of millions of people left the American urban centers. Whites by the droves left and oftentimes left jobs and beautiful homes behind. Into that fray, the freeways, the interstates come and dissect neighborhoods, leaving blacks to take over certain neighborhoods that were undesirable at that point. And the tax base leaves these cities due to white flight. The upper class and upper middle class are gone. So now your tax base is coming from lower class immigrants and minorities and working class people. And so the city services get cut back, parks and night street lights, police protection, clean water. These things become less and less a guarantee. Education, hospitals, all the stuff that the urban center had provided for Americans throughout the late 1800s, early 20th century, it was now decaying because no one was going to service these black people. And now, of course, they're being displaced once again by urban renewal, and the whites want those city cores back. And so we're seeing that being reversed, and racism was once again spurring that wave of development and displacement. And it's disgusting and it's disturbing, and the way they've even used the riots and disturbances of social unrest to kind of enact and push developments. And the corruption, I think, is so complete, and we see such a small part of it. But I just wanted to share that because that's what white flight was. It's not this cute term that we could kind of laugh and joke about. It was the movement of hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of white Americans away from the city centers that they built, lived in, housed themselves, educated themselves, and we just left because there was too many blacks on our block now. I'm out of words. So I just wanted to share that because it's some honest emoting. It's real how I feel. And these jazz men and women brought so much joy to this world. To think this is how we treated them? Like they were diseased. Like they were bringing the plague. Let's flee. Women and children first. Get to the station wagon. Eden Plain, Prairie View, wherever, whatever suburb will take us. Let's just get out of here. Let's move to the banal strip mall, frontage road cul-de-sac of Rose, Prairie, Grandview, whatever suburb you want to talk about. Because we haven't let the blacks in there yet. And it'll be better for us. It's disgusting. And the only thing that I think matches and rivals my indignation and my sadness is my anger. It's something we should never speak of lightly, white flight. What a travesty. What an injustice. What a shameful legacy that we once have to wear around our necks. We abandon our own lives because we were too scared to get to know somebody who might be a little different from us, but really who shares the same nationality and cheers for the same baseball teams. Anyway, I'm just going to leave that there. Y'all be good. We'll talk to you soon. Peace. Morning, everybody. How are we doing today? Coming to you from a little bit of a different location today. I'm coming to you live from the 10-inch cabinet. And there's quite a few very cool 10 inches kept in this cage. The 10 inch is a magical little piece. That's a timepiece. It's from the early 50s, pretty much always, you know. The 78 was the same size, 10 inches. The transition was simpler just to make the same size LP. And they went to the 12 inch, of course, only a few short years later, which really hurt a lot of the small labels at the time. But today I'm just going to do something really simple. I'm just going to pull 10 inches and talk to you 10 by 10. And my friend Ken Micallef is going to edit this video, thanks to Ken. He's got more of that type of interest and savvy than I do. It's not really my strong suit. Number one, I pulled this one, Dizzy Gillespie Stan Getz Sextet on Norgran, early 50s. The thing that surprised me most about the Stan Getz and Dizzy Gillespie session, there's actually a part 2 to it as well on Norgran. That's number 18. But the thing that surprised me the most about this record was you're hearing Dizzy in a fairly open form. He's not in the limitations of some of his bigger bands, and he's not just doing he was a lot the educator, Gillespie, but here you find him kind of in a very comfortable, natural setting, and his ballad playing is what really just took me apart on this. He's a far greater ballad player than we remember. We remember Dizzy so much for his virtuosity and his incredible ability to spin a narrative at high tempo without forsaking melody and groove like Clifford Brown. We forget Dizzy sometimes, you know. We remember Louie, we remember Dizzy, we remember Freddie Hubbard. Dizzy was an incredible player, and I think his light demeanor often kind of made people dismiss him a little bit too much, and he does suffer somewhat from some of the labels that he's on, not having access to the best of the best. The stuff at Phillips, it's good, but it's not great. This stuff at Norgran, though, that's quality Dizzy Gillespie. Number 2 on my list is Chuck Wayne. This is on the Progressive label, which existed briefly in the 50s, made some 10 inches, I think a couple LPs. And then the label reforms in the 70s and does some good stuff then. If I'm not mistaken, they're the ones that hire David Stone Martin back to do some of those covers in the 70s. But early Chuck Wayne quintet. Of course, his record on Savoy is kind of most people's introduction to him. He has some stuff on Prestige as well. But this is a very early 10-inch. And Chuck Wayne is, if you look at the Savoy album cover, you're going to think he's kind of a country dude. He's a New York City guy. And Chuck Wayne was an incredible technician, and he actually reinvents a lot of chord inversions and how to play. And if you Google or Wikipedia Chuck Wayne, you'll end up seeing some of his guitar innovations. There's lists of it, stuff that he brought to the game that Chuck Wayne is the sole purveyor of, and he's a great educator. You know, he understood things on a molecular, mathematical level, but doesn't play scientifically, if that makes sense. Some guys who get too molecular become very much stuck within the rigidity of the math. And he's just a beautiful lyrical player who also understood the math and science and wrote, codified a lot of what jazz guitar is and could be. So Chuck Wayne's a very important figure that's very overlooked today. His body of work's not huge, but he does have some stuff out there that's very noteworthy, absolutely. Now, Little Jazz, Prestige is guilty of some of the worst album covers in the 10-inch era, and that's no exception. Their New Jazz titles look the same way at this point, which is weird. New Jazz exists in this period. It goes away for most of the mid-50s and comes back in 58, 59. And it's a different entity by then. It becomes more the experimental side of Prestige. But New Jazz does exist at this point. I have a couple that look exactly the same. You can see Roost also has some pretty boring 10 inches. It's like baking soda kind of things, you know. That's where the Gus Wilde Bethlehem covers really changed the game. But enough about that. Roy Eldridge, Little Jazz, as he's known, was a little fiery guy. And Eldridge, let me just say, few can play like Roy. He's one of the most fantastic, dynamic innovators. And Dizzy Gillespie's main influence was Roy Eldridge. And there's a lineage there from Armstrong to Eldridge to Dizzy Gillespie that's a chain unbroken. They're very much descendants of the same cloth. Eldridge has all that brightness, that fire. Freddie Hubbard is that same. Clifford Brown. Eldridge is a really important step in the development of the trumpet, and he's one of the fiercest cats in that arena. Eldridge isn't for everyone. He, at the time, especially in the 30s and 40s, was a little much for some of the players. He was so dynamic, so innovative, threw things out there that were unconventional and challenged what people's conventions and thoughts on what trumpet was and should be. But he was always a brilliant player. And I think he's really, again, one of the overlooked guys in the eyes of the collectors today. He's the opposite of a guy like Sweets Edison, who is that sweet saccharine candy muted sound. Eldridge is more that eternal fire. Now we're talking Don Byas. Great cover. I believe that's Burt Goldblatt, if I remember correctly. Pretty sure it is. Awesome album cover, nice color choices. Byas is one of those great sax players from the bebop era who gets disenfranchised with America and the social condition. And a lot of these guys would go to Europe and be treated so differently when there that some of them ended up staying. More than some, a lot. And Byas is one of those guys that, because he was gone so long, he kind of gets overshadowed by the Rollinses and the John Coltrane's and even the Dexter Gordon, who also spent a lot of time in Europe. Gordon's return was celebrated because he came back at the right time with new traditional kind of re-energizing in the 80s of the old sounds. Dexter was at the right place at the right time to really cash in on that. Byas' return, he was pretty much a forgotten man, which is very sad. One of the great players, and he does a lot of great recordings in Europe, and this was not recorded by Atlantic, if I recall. This is also some European recording that was licensed to Atlantic. That I'm pretty sure of, I'm not positive, but like I said, Blue Note does that a lot too, where they license stuff from European labels and that don't have to record it themselves. The great Stan Getz, number 411 on Roost. Getz was a big part of the early chapter of Roost Records. And Roost Records is an important New York label. It was founded around the nightclub and the scene that was going on. It's an important little label that ends up getting purchased by Roulette. And Roulette's a good label, but it was run by the mob, and Count Basie's kind of the main feature at Roulette. When you're at Roost, it's a much more organic, driven by the innovations of the music of the time. Very cutting edge, Roost was. Like I said, Roulette is not that so much. It's more, Basie's our cash cow. We're going to kind of milk that as much as we can. With Roost, it's just solid. Teddy Reeves, the guy behind the operation, and between Sonny Stitt, early Lockjaw Davis, the great Johnny Smith on guitar, and Stan Getz, there's some really important recordings going on at Roost. 52, 53, 54, that whole era. And I actually love the Roost 10-inch era. Along with Bethlehem, Roost is probably one of my favorite 10-inch eras. They're very much at the cutting edge. Ahead of Blue Note, ahead of Prestige even. They're doing some really great, modern, cutting-edge stuff, along with people like Powell and Gillespie and Parker, who also are making some sides with these guys. Some of those dates are a little older, but the 10-inch stuff at Roost is to be sought after. It's great stuff. And again, Burt Goldblatt does a lot of the artwork for Bethlehem and for Roost. So definitely something to keep your eye on. Bethlehem, the aforementioned, is one of my favorite labels. And if you're looking at the body of work of jazz from, say, 1953 to 1956, Bethlehem is really a focal point, especially for the white side of things, but even the black cats like Bethlehem are doing some great stuff. Charlie Shavers, again, one of the most overlooked players in the canon, a fantastic swing era guy in the lineage of Armstrong, more with the Sweets Edison school than the Eldridge school. He's more of a sweet, saccharine, sassy player that's relying on personality and inflection and comic relief almost. Shavers is a character, and it comes across in his playing. There's a flirtation. There's a... he's just going to get under your skin and tickle your fancy. I love Charlie Shavers. He's again a victim of the labels he was on. He makes some fine records. Had a Blue Note signed him, we would all be Charlie Shaver's fans. Even Verve doesn't have a lot of Shaver's stuff. They have some, but Shaver's ends up on Everest and labels that we don't take as serious. And Charlie Shaver's stuff on Everest is actually really good. He's got some stuff on Capitol, some stuff on MGM, just some weirder, not jazz-centric places. But he was very much a crossover success and a much bigger star then than he is now. Which some of these jazz cats are bigger stars now than they were then. A lot of the Blue Note cats were anonymous. When you look back to, say, 1957, nobody knew who Hank Mobley was nationally. Charlie Shaver's does have some juice. He's got some recognition. He was a pretty big name, and it's a wonderful Burt Goldblatt album cover. And Burt Goldblatt's kind of at the center of graphic art design in jazz and in the music industry, period, in the 10-inch era. So much of what's happening in the 10-inch era, Goldblatt is just getting graphic work from all these different companies, and he's killing it. This is before Reed Miles is at Blue Note. David Stone Martin's doing his stuff for Norman Granz. But really, Burt Goldblatt's such an incredible innovator in the look of modern music packaging. Before, it was very much that simplicity, ridiculous looking, a soapbox. You could sell detergent. There you go. That's your cover. And Goldblatt really sets the world on edge. And some of the record execs asked Gus Wilde, which I've said this before, what are you guys trying to do? Start a photography company as well as, selling prints as well as music? But for Gus Wilde, it made sense. So, Chu Berry, me and Scott Ball were talking about Chu the other day, and he goes back to the early days with very early bassy Hot Lips Page, Walter Page, early renditions of those groups. Chu was a big part of. One of the great descendants of Coleman Hawkins, one of the other early innovators on the saxophone. Berry's just a great player. This features Roy Eldridge and Hot Lips Page. It's on the Commodore label, a label that a lot of collectors today kind of ignore. Commodore also has a big record store in New York City where people like Billie Holiday would go in and perform, and some of that stuff got recorded and was released. Who else is on this, does it say? Chu Berry, Roy Eldridge, Danny Barker's on the guitar, Clyde Hart's on the piano, Artie Shapiro's on the bass, and Big Sit Catless on the drums. So a classic lineup from that era. Nice little Commodore 10-inch. Chu doesn't have the body of work out there today for collectors to gravitate towards like a guy like Coleman Hawkins does, or even Ben Webster. So Chu gets kind of overlooked. But he's truly one of the great designers of what the tenor saxophone can be in jazz, along with Roy Eldridge on the trumpet. And again, we should not ever look Chu Berry. A Blue Note representation here. You got 11 all Blue Note 10-inch. This is the great Bud Powell. And Blue Note in the early 50s is still kind of finding themselves. This is 5003, which makes it one of the first Blue Note 10-inches that came out, probably 52. The recordings might even be before that. It could be 78 era stuff. Powell's career at Blue Note's kind of convoluted. He kind of comes and goes a little bit. And it's hard to gauge which era of Powell you're getting. Is it the bebop virtuosity and untouched, unrivaled dynamic playing of a younger Powell, or is it the more younger or older, perhaps melodic, but also fractured and broken Powell? That shows up some of his later recordings. Powell was one of the most tragic figures in jazz, without any question. He was beaten severely by a police officer in Philadelphia for having the balls to be outside being black during the daytime, and sent to prison several times and psychiatric hospitals. The haunting from that beating never really leaves him. And so it leaves him very much on edge, very much living in fear, essentially. And I can relate, and maybe not know exactly, but I can see if I had the shit kicked out of me for nothing, I wouldn't trust a lot of things either. I wouldn't be too comfortable all the time on a regular basis, and that was Powell. And it's sad that we lost such a genius, because Powell is a genius. He's a brilliant bebop player that brings what Charlie Parker invents to the piano. And every one of Parker's disciples, as much as they are descendants in the saxophone kingdom, there's also a I don't say gender, but a trans instrument disciple on all the great jazz instruments. There's a bird that comes along and takes what bird does on the alto sax and brings it to that instrument. And Powell is that for the piano. There's a number of other guys of that era who were kind of in that work, in that same place. But Powell was really the guy that was pushing the envelope and bringing that dexterity and that virtuosity. Of course, Art Tatum is a guy that kind of precedes Parker with some of the innovations of bebop without it ever being codified or being recognized as that. Tatum was an incredible player who was going through arpeggios and scales and doing all kinds of things that are reminiscent of bebop well before Parker's innovations. And I've even read that Parker was listening to some Tatum and wanted to kind of graft that into what he was doing. It was just Parker got the recognition for it. And deservedly so. Parker was a genius as well. This is on Roost as well, 414. Dizzy in Paris. Vocals by Joe Carroll. This is a great album cover. Again, it's a great Burt Goldblatt album cover showing the city streets of Paris in the background with Dizzy floating over the top of it. This is recorded live in Paris, and Roost licensed it and puts it out here in America. And that's one of the things that's happening a lot in the 50s. A lot of these guys are going to Europe after the war, finding work, finding appreciation. The war years did bring a lot of jazz to Europe, and in the post-war years, there's such a demand for it that, along with the great European players that are happening, there's work for a lot of the American guys to come over there and be treated well. And some guys came home and tried to make America a better place. Others couldn't stomach being back here. Others just couldn't even live under this cloak of oppression anymore, and a lot stayed in Europe and often left their careers and families behind and communities behind. And a lot of the guys from America who went to Europe said what they ended up missing most was their black fellowship and their black neighborhoods, what was going on in black America. You were very disconnected from it. There wasn't the internet. A postcard took a few weeks to get across on a boat. So there was very much a disconnection with the current language, the current hipness, the current dress code, all the things that were happening in the black community. You were very disassociated from that when you lived in Europe as a jazz musician, and yet many stayed all the same because things were just so less stressful when you wake up every morning and don't have to worry about, it's the day I get my head crushed in by a gun. It's the day I get thrown in jail for crossing the street the wrong way. Like, it's a stressful thing. So this is not the best sounding Dizzy, but there's some fantastic dynamic Dizzy on there all the same. And then last, I'm going to show you number 10, this fantastic Bud Shank. Early Bud Shank, 53, 54, on the Nocturne label, which is a small micro label on the West Coast. They only have 6 10-inches and they're gone. There's a few other sessions in the can that Liberty ends up putting out, but there's only 6 10-inches, maybe it's 8. But there's a very small output of Nocturne, and it's great West Coast cool bop. That's that term I've coined lately for that hard driving West Coast white. It's not hard bop, but it's not West Coast cool either. Cool implies a whole lot of laid back, easy going, fun, intricate, but not serious. You know what I mean? Cool as a bit. Brubeck and Chico Hamilton to me are kind of great examples of cool, right? But there's a lot of stuff on the West Coast that's a whole lot more intense and dynamic and fast tempoed, and all the furiosity playing wise, it's only missing a certain emotional dynamic to be hard bop, so it lacks that grit. That there's something about it where it just doesn't kind of rub you the same way. It's a low grit sandpaper, so you can rub it just as fast and get that tempo going, but you're only going to polish a little bit. You ain't that gritty Blue Note sandpaper. You'll chisel down some granite with that stuff. This stuff can never really attain that level, but it's awesome stuff. This Nocturne stuff, Roy Hart from Pacific Records also co-founds Nocturne, and it's along with Harry Babison, the great bass player and celloist, who's another fantastic kind of forgotten West Coast player. Babison and Roy Hart found Nocturne, and all the little records they do with Herbie Harper and Virgil Gonzalez. There's a great Earl Hines record, this Bud Shank record, Bob Envelson. It's some serious stuff that gets way too overlooked and is really pretty hard to come by, to be honest. It was one of the toughest things to collect was these Nocturne 10 inches. I think I got one from Israel, believe it or not. And that's the great Bud Shank. And he goes to Pacific after this, and he makes one of the longest stays at a record label any guy ever did. He must be at Pacific Records for 20, 30 years, make 40, 50 records for Pacific. But early Bud Shank, you can see how aggressive these young white kids were and how much they loved this black music. And it was risky and it was kind of cool, and the chicks might dig it if you're playing that black music. And a lot of white cats didn't stay with it, but a guy like Bud Shank stays playing jazz his whole life. It became, every much a part of his life as it was to a black cat playing jazz music. And for him, it was probably more of a career. I bet you Bud Shank made 5 times the money that a Charlie Shavers did. And that's just a result of the economics of different race. Shavers is working at small labels trying to get signed here and there, doing side work and session work. Bud Shank works for Pacific, who has a much bigger distribution. They're playing big colleges. Black cats didn't get to do that. Black cats had to work hard for every penny, every scrap and cent. So the black cats never stayed in jazz for the money necessarily. They did it because it's what they did. They didn't know what else to do, and it made them feel better about their place in this world. And white cats always have a certain element of that as well. But for a guy like Bud Shank, the career was doing well enough that there was no need for him to think about another career. And a lot of the white cats, I can tell you from just all the research I've done, there's a lot more white cats who walk away from jazz and then at some point and just move on to other things. It's a pretty rare thing for black jazz cats to do that. They either die, go to prison, or once in a while they become a teacher. But for the most part, black jazz musicians stay jazz musicians their whole life, and their career ends when they die. For the most part, there's exceptions to every rule. But so that's today's episode, 10 by 10, 10 fun 10 inches. I hope you all enjoyed that. If you did, we'll do another one in a few weeks. Thanks to Ken up front here for editing this one for me and putting some of his loving touches on it. Y'all be safe. Have a great day. Peace.